What is going on, everybody? I am back today to talk about a movie that I'm relatively late to the game seeing. I have done a really horrible job recently getting to the theater to watch new releases. My life has just been kind of wild and chaotic recently, and I've been doing my best to go and see new content, but I haven't been able to get to as many like Thursday night premieres and things as I have previously, just because that's the way life works sometimes. And I've been very excited to watch this movie because it is from director Ari Aster, who has made three very different movies that I have really enjoyed immensely. I think Hereditary is one of the best horror films made in the past 20 years. I think that it was really kind of the start of approaching more slow burn familial drama horror with supernatural elements layered in and kind of utilizing the driving force of like a family drama to convey something larger with the supernatural elements to make a really hard hitting film. And it's one I did my review a while back when I revisited it for the A24 Archive series. I adore that movie. I love Midsummer. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And the more I sit on Beau is Afraid, the more I really appreciate it. I really liked it when I saw it the first time. But I think the longer I sit with it and the more that I digest it, the more that I can really appreciate what Ari Aster was going for with that movie. And I had a feeling with this not leaning into the supernatural, with it being much more of a straightforward drama about a very real world event that was in recent memory, that it was gonna probably rub a lot of people the wrong way. And I didn't feel like the perception of this was gonna be great because when it comes to something like COVID, where we're 5 years removed from the peak of COVID when things were really severe, a lot of people don't like digesting art that comes from a place of such relevance and immediacy because it makes them uncomfortable and it takes them back to a place that they don't really like to revisit. And knowing Ari Aster and the way that he's able to tap into very visceral, raw emotions, I was curious to see what his approach was going to be with this movie. And I'm really excited to tell you about Eddington today. Eddington is directed by Ari Aster. In May of 2020, a standoff between a small town sheriff and a mayor sparks a powder keg as neighbor is pitted against neighbor in Eddington, New Mexico. So I was super excited to watch this movie. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of Ari Aster. I love all three of the movies that he's made. So I was really curious as to what I was going to think about this, especially with the polarizing reaction that it has received since it was initially dropped in theaters. And I think this movie is brilliant. I think this might be one of the best movies that Ari Aster has made in his career thus far. I think that it is incredibly relevant. I think it is hard hitting. I think the way that it explores sort of how our country has become completely and totally separated, the issues on both the left and the right, the way businesses and billion-dollar corporations take advantage of society when they are poured into technology and current events in order to fulfill their own evil agenda, diving into conspiracy theories, performative activism. There's a ton of really amazing material here, and I feel like the tepid response, or people that say, oh, it's too centrist, which I think is completely and totally false, especially with where the movie goes in the third act. I don't really think it takes a very centrist perspective whatsoever. I do think that it presents a lot of the issues where it showcases the flaws, but I think Ari Aster's thesis statement that he's mentioned in multiple interviews of like there being no more universal truth in our society is really what resonates hardest when the film comes to an end. And I'm excited to discuss it a little bit with you today. For the beginning of the film, we are introduced to Sheriff Joe Cross, played by Joaquin Phoenix, who lives in Eddington, New Mexico. And he is an anti-COVID, anti-mask sheriff who is completely against all of these mandates that the current mayor of the town has enforced. And that mayor is Ted Garcia, played by Pedro Pascal. And there's a ton of tension between these two because clearly one leans much more left, one leans on the right. Joe believes that these mask mandates are dumb and that COVID could never exist in their small town and that all of these issues are just made up and that they don't have to abide by the same type of rules that everyone else does. And Ted Garcia is someone who very much puts himself out there as this progressive who's going to do all of these really incredible things. But he doesn't. He really just talks and he kind of just lets things happen around him, very much like the Democratic Party, which I thought was really funny. And so you have these two characters, and we get introduced to elements of their lives where Ted lives with his son. His wife has walked out at some point. We learn early on in the movie that Ted had something to do with Joaquin Phoenix's wife, Louise, played by Emma Stone, who her and her husband Joe have a pretty tumultuous relationship. I would say they're not very close, and she is struggling during the pandemic. They live with Luis's mother, Dawn, who is a crazed right-wing conspiracy theorist who is constantly putting forth all this false information that she's reading on the internet. And we can tell Luis has a lot of trauma surrounding her upbringing and her life. And we're introduced to different members of the community. And eventually, Joe, who is the sheriff of the community, decides he's fed up with what Ted is doing and that he is going to run for mayor. And so we have this mayoral race, the central focus of the movie. But mostly what this is it's examining this very small rural community and how COVID has impacted the people and how their reaction to COVID and the situation is based on their individual lived experience. So, as I said, I loved this movie. I think it is incredible, and I really feel like a lot of the negative criticisms for this film are very unwarranted. And I'm not sure what you expected from this movie, like, especially when it comes to being a creative. Directors are always going to sort of put in there how they feel and kind of give an idea where their headspace is. But this is very much like digesting a situation that we lived through very recently and doing it in real time by utilizing a very small populated community that is experiencing these effects the same way everyone else did, but because it's a small town isolated from a lot of the real world problems, the way that the people in the community adapt and deal with the situations, which is why I thought it was so brilliant. This movie is filled with incredible performances. I do think Joaquin Phoenix and Pedro Pascal are the standouts in this film. I feel like the way that they perform, their chemistry on screen together is just truly remarkable. I feel like they live and breathe these characters in a way that's incredibly realistic, and you can feel their motivations, power dynamics between the two of them. There were so many scenes that there's one in particular that you've probably heard about, or if you've seen the movie, where Joe is confronting Ted at this party. Katy Perry's Firework is playing in the background, and it's just incredible filmmaking. It really, like, these actors are giving it the best of their ability, and they're phenomenal. And there's a star-studded cast in this, along with some new faces that you might not have seen before. And I just thought they all did a really fantastic job to create this world that I was immersed in from the very first frame. Cinematographically, this is one of the most beautifully shot films of the entire year. It feels like a modern day Western. There's a lot of just open space and like wide angle shots that really capture sort of how isolated this community is from the rest of the world. And I think that it's just very well done. And like the editing decisions, where they place characters in the frame, I feel like there's tension that is so palpable you can cut it with a knife throughout the entirety of the movie, which is very similar to how it felt during COVID, where there was so much uncertainty as to what was happening or the levels of the illness or what it could do to people and just how severe things could get. And I feel like Ari Aster does a really amazing job through the cinematography, kind of placing us right back into this situation that we're all so incredibly familiar with, and making us relive a lot of these things that we remember very viscerally in real time. And I also loved the score to this movie. It very much had a Western vibe. I feel like it was cued in at brilliant moments, but I feel like the absence of sound in moments as well really helped this hit hard. And I think that one of the things about this movie is it's incredibly uncomfortable, and it's not afraid to poke at any and everyone. And I think that that's what makes the movie so effective, is it's able to critique and pull apart both sides in a way that I think is incredibly poignant. And I think this is the type of movie that America needs to see, because it really touches on issues that I think are important, which is what it all boils down to. Why I love this movie so much is I feel like the way Ari Aster is presenting this information is he's just kind of showing it to you, saying, experience this. This is what we're doing as a society, and uses the last 10 minutes of the movie to say, if we keep indulging like this and doing things the same way, this is where we're going to end up. And I think that he does it in a way that hits so incredibly hard. And like I said, he's not afraid to attack any single point. He does an amazing job pointing out the hateful ignorance of the right, the self-centered nature of conservatives when it comes to Joaquin Phoenix's character's selfishness in not wearing a mask, even though he has his own respiratory issues, and watching his character throughout his exposure to COVID. And there's some really on the nose moments there that I think work really brilliantly, and a lot surrounding conservative ideology and conspiracy theory. I think he touches on some really important elements of like the conservatives are sheep. They will listen and do anything that their orange leader tells them to, and they're very easily manipulated. And it's because of what I discussed earlier in the review, Ari Aster speaking on there being a lack of universal truth. And I think that's very much true. When you can convince a group of people anything by just saying it out loud, there's no fact checking, there's no research, there's no anything, it becomes really difficult to find common ground. And I thought that that was handled in a really brilliant way. I also think the way that he critiques the left and the Democratic Party when it comes to performative activism and Democrats kind of working in their own self-interest. Ted Garcia's character comes across as a very charming, real human being until we get behind the surface a little bit and see sort of his inactivism, the ability he has to do more. And he's not. He's really sort of just hand-holding this multi-million-dollar corporation that's trying to build a data center in their community, which I think is one of the most important parts of the entire film, is this data center that's being built in the background. It's always happening. It's not at the forefront, but I think that's so incredibly indicative of what billionaires do to us when real life experience is happening. The central focal point of this film is phones, it's technology, it's screens. When real world events happen, like a global pandemic that kills so many people and causes horrible devastation, you have the internet where everyone has an opinion and everyone wants to fight each other. And you have the right who are trying to say that it wasn't real, even though that people were dying of this disease. And then you have the left who all thought they knew the exact way to approach the situation, which causes fighting and it causes violence. Well, during all of that, you have a corporation that's like, hey, I can get my agenda accomplished because no one's paying attention to me. And I thought that in the last 10 minutes of the movie, with what happens with the data center and the corporation, it was really brilliant. And I thought that it was an incredible commentary of how the people in power will take advantage of you being distracted. And I think that that's very true. There's so much hate and vitriol in our country now because the right is so concerned with stripping human rights away from people and doing just terrible things and pouring into conspiracy theories that they've completely forgotten about human decency. And then you have the left, which is a collection of people who I think genuinely do care, but also people who are incredibly performative that will just speak on issues and discuss things for a feeling of moral superiority, which then causes very immense conflict, which then means if people can't find a common ground, it's really easy to manipulate them. And I thought that Ari Aster, in the way that he approached that subject matter, was incredibly brilliant, and it sat with me for a long time after the movie was over. And you have this one character in particular who's this young teenage kid who gets involved in activism solely because he likes a girl. And I thought that that was really indicative of our society as well, to see like kids sort of shift and utilize these really important political issues, like the way Ari Aster utilizes George Floyd's murder in this, and how it was something that was truly horrendous and awful. And like the fact a human being was treated that way and murdered on camera. He was literally murdered on camera, and the way people utilized it for their own best interest. And then you have a really powerful group like the Black Lives Matter movement that was making a statement by doing these large scale protests. But then like him showcasing, he did a really great job showcasing the real authentic human beings affected by these experiences, and then the people sort of utilizing it as a performative thing. And I thought that it was really great because I think that's activism as a whole, right? It's incredibly important to stand up for issues and to fight for issues, but there are people who are performative, and there are people that act like they care, but they don't really. They just want to one up someone morally. And I think touching on those issues definitely had to poke at some people and make them uncomfortable, because it's just honestly honestly the fact of the matter. And I really liked that they utilized that character. And then there was also like little things too, where this was set near a Native American reservation, and just seeing how the Native American police officers were treated by these white conservatives. And I felt like there were so many great little nuances throughout the film that kind of just were pulling apart and analyzing our country as a whole. And even like the small character of Austin Butler's like conspiracy theorist when it comes to like discussing child traffickers and child abusers, and like just kind of looking at the entirety of our society through this microscope and saying, let's dissect all of this and find out what the big issue is, which is that human beings were thrown into this situation that they didn't know what to expect, they didn't know how to deal with it, and they all reacted based on their own lived experience. And I just think that there's something so incredibly fascinating about that, while also utilizing it as a tale of like the internet is a distraction. The internet can pull us away from what's actually important, and the internet can hide, the wrongdoings of these billionaires and people who want to take advantage of you. And I just thought that it was incredibly brilliant. It's a movie that I've not stopped thinking about since I watched it. I can't wait to revisit it again to see what I pick up on that I missed the first time. But if any of this sounds interesting to you, I implore you to watch this. It's vastly different than anything Ari Aster has made in his career, and I think it's one of his best movies. So have you seen Eddington? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Leave me a comment down below and let me know what you thought. I thought this movie was incredible. I loved it, and I can't wait to watch it again. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.